episode 104.
Wireless LAN Professionals is a place to educate, inform, encourage, and entertain those involved in wireless LANs. This Wireless LAN Professionals podcast is an audio manifestation of these goals. Our host is a wireless LAN veteran, consultant, designer, and teacher, Keith Parsons. And now, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals.
Welcome to Wireless LAN Professionals podcast. This is episode 104. And in today's episode, we have a 10 talk from one of our previous WLPCs. Colleen's going to be talking to us about how do you support 1 million users. Some great information there. We have an interview from Cate on Badger Wi-Fi and how his blog has helped Glenn learn things. I personally do an interview with David Coleman on how to write books and how he's written books in the WLAN industry, but it's also about how you can also be involved in writing, if nothing more than just a blog or a white paper, how to get involved. We also have a Bad Fi segment with Eddie Forero and an interview I did with Tim on the WLAN Association. It used to be called the Wireless LAN Advisory Board. They changed their name to Wireless LAN Association, and some ideas on what it's there for and how you can get involved.
10 Talks.
So I always didn't have scale problems. Actually, I installed the first access point at the University of Pennsylvania back in 2000. Grew that network to a little over 4,000 before I left there and started working at Comcast in their Xfinity Wi-Fi program a couple years ago. But when I was at University of Pennsylvania back in 2008, it was interesting because we had an RFI bake-off process where we were I was reluctant to get rid of my fat APs and go to where everyone was, a controller-based model in the industry. And as part of our process, we were soliciting feedback from other universities on their deployments from some of the finalists that we were looking at and how things were going. And one of the most interesting answers I got was from the fellows at CMU at the time. And they basically told me that both of the vendors they were dealing with at the time were okay, but the hardest part that they had was supporting 2 different vendors at the same time on their campus. And now that I sit here supporting 9 million access points with 5 different vendors and all sorts of different models, I wholeheartedly agree with them. So if I'm going to talk about scale, I have to say that first, there's a couple things that we need to think about. Monitoring. These are some key elements. I mean, you always need to know what's going on in your network, no matter what the size is. That's very important, and I'm going to circle back to this in a second. Second is automation. I mean, you do need to know what's going on in your plant. I mean, you'll have schema for making sure you have accurate lat long, how you deploy things, spreadsheets. I mean, that stuff's just gone by the wayside, right? You need automation for everything like that. You need any type of, when you're dealing with support calls at this scale, you need self-healing, because the last thing you want to do is have 1,000 hands in the cookie jar and everyone's going off in a different direction. This idea of self-organizing networks, or SON, is a concept that's well established in the world of LTE. In fact, you might hear terms, if you looked it up on Wikipedia, for things like configuring network elements and operating performance, and provide these self-healing capabilities in case of network interference or faulty network elements. I mean, to me, that honestly sounds like it's a catchphrase that management says, go make that happen and figure it out, right? So let's do that exercise. Let's figure it out. Could something like this happen? We've been pitching this plug-and-play idea with the controller-based architecture for years. Can we scale that? Can we scale it to 1 million access points? Does that make sense? Can we do it in a multi-vendor environment? So let's shrink the problem down, right? Let's simplify. This is, you got to keep it simple. This is what we're trying to figure out here. Let's say that it's easy to get Wi-Fi out there, millions or hundreds, thousands, whatnot. I mean, we're all dealing with tons of access points out there. But can we manage those radios well at scale? So let's say I build a framework for this. Let's say I'm going to read in some key network elements, some data from these radios, assess how it's going, and then, maybe do something about it if I think I could change and definitively say I might make this experience better. Now, I want to be careful not to say, hey, I want to build this giant framework for all these APs, and all I'm basically is a expensive channel change and power algorithm. So that's not what I'm thinking about here. What I'm thinking about is some of the stuff that was in the 802.11k standard, and some elements that all of us have been dealing with on a regular basis to say, okay, I'm going to troubleshoot a problem. What's the data, and what I need to basically assess what is going on the network? Well, I'm a network engineer, so I'm always going to be all for client interface statistics, right? So just retransmission errors, TX, RX, the basics, right? I mean, that tells you a multitude of things that are going on in the network. It's the radio we're talking about, so I'm going to want to know about activity factors. Like, when am I going to reach that energy detect threshold? When is there the clear channel assessment? When am I going to know when a radio was too busy serving clients, or the noise floor was too high, or client RSSI was, reached a certain threshold, right? So we can debate these for some time. But let's pretend that was the easy part. And I will be happy to take this debate offline with anyone here, because I think it's a very interesting discussion on what to capture. But let's say we figure this out, we set up this framework, we start reading in elements. Now, I'm talking a multi-vendor environment here, right? So we got to default to the lowest common denominator on how to grab this information. Okay, I think most access points out there can support SNMP, right? Let's say we poll every hour, every 5 minutes. I mean, can you imagine collecting SNMP statistics from over 1 million access points every 5 minutes? Does that sound reasonable to you? Is it manageable to scale, to poll, and to store that information in a central repository? Does that even make sense? All right, so these, we could debate this for a long time as well too, right? So let's say we draw the network and say we're going to do this once an hour. We're going to collect these statistics. Okay, we got to keep simplifying this right now. So now we're building this framework. So why don't we take a page? So how do we measure, right? So I've had to do a ton of home improvement projects over my lifetime. Measure twice, cut once, right? I don't want to make any changes, but right now, let's just try to figure out, let's assess that situation. Well, the LTE and everything that we're doing within the cellular industry is basically always had this wireless mean opinion score. So let's take these statistics, let's do a little algorithm, let's do some shifting, and let's figure out how we can basically assign a score to this. So, okay, now we have a score, so we can assess how the radio is going, we can see, we have some visibility. Well, I did mention that we're talking about different vendor types, right? So now, not all of them use the exact same statistical counting, either due to equipment type or chipset. Is there an apples to apples comparison? Can we simplify this? How do we translate this into different deployment types as well? Can I reasonably compare radio resources for the same way that in people's houses or to multi-dwelling units to venues? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's Wi-Fi, but it's not apples to apples. I mean, the majority of the clients will still be similar that are out there, right? But we're not doing the same usage patterns in all these different areas. So as I start to think about all these cases, this also just starts to get just more and more difficult to try to put these into some buckets to say, hey, this is what it is, and scale this. Okay, so here I am pitching the idea of the self-organizing networks for managing RF at scale, but this might still be something that's in the future, something that could be a standard, something that we might look to in the future. But I think the key takeaway here is some of these metrics that I identified, or that all of you can identify here. And I think the important part that we need to think about and discuss is knowing what is on our network and being able to understand. That helps us make the decisions to do any type of analysis, predictive, put things out there, disable some radios, anything like that. And that's the information that helps us keep the lights on in a network of any size. So I'd be happy, since I wasted so much time with this, I'll be happy to debate some of this stuff offline with any of you. There are less than 10 females here, so I'm sure you'll be able to find me. Thank you.
Wireless LAN blog reviews
with Glenn Cate.
A closer look at some of our favorite Wi-Fi blogs and their authors.
Glenn, Cate, welcome to the show. What Wi-Fi blog review do you have for us this time?
Hey, Matthew, thank you so much. And I'm looking at a website this week that on the main page has this strange but well-dressed animal holding a strange-looking device. And he's also talking about some strange technology. So what am I looking at? Well, we're going to be reviewing BadgerFi.com with Mitch Dickey. BadgerFi is BADGER-FI.com. And you can follow Mitch. His Twitter handle is @Badger_Fi. So that's @BADGER_FI. Mitch is a great wireless engineer. He works at a large school system in Virginia, and he's got some Cisco certs, and he's also working on his CWNE certification. He's also a ham radio operator, and I love his vanity call sign that he has, W4LAN. That's right, Whiskey 4 Local Area Network. Nice call sign, Mitch. If you hadn't taken that, I probably would have grabbed it. He's also been a presenter at conferences, and he just recently presented at the WLPC 2017 conference in Phoenix. Mitch's website is just really neat. It's a dumping ground, if you will, about all kinds of wireless testing and experiences that he's had. His website is very easy to navigate, and he's done some testing with MetaGeek and Cisco Clean Air. He's done a review of 802.11r, a review of the NetBees monitoring network, and has recapped his attendances at Cisco Live and just at WLPC 2017 as well.
Thank you, Glenn. Anything else we don't want to miss on the site?
Okay. Well, I would say, if nothing else, you can know Mitch as the SCA guy. Single-channel architecture, as many of you know, is kind of opposed to what a lot of us installed in our networks, which is multi-channel architecture. But SCA is good to know about, and Mitch knows a lot about SCA architecture. Most of us know that Maru Networks, which is now owned by Fortinet, is probably the biggest leading vendor who does SCA technology. And Mitch has used that in the school district where he works, and he says SCA works very well, thank you. And did a presentation at WLPC, so you can look at that link on his webpage. He also embeds some videos of Dr. Bhargavan, who is the founder of Maru, and he details how SCA works. And if you're studying for CWNA or any other exams, I know you're going to be going over SCA and contrasting with multi-channel architecture. So you'll want to check out Mitch's website. He really describes SCA well. And if you have any questions, I'm sure you can drop Mitch a comment or hit him up DM on Twitter, and he'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have about SCA. So check out Badger_Fi at Mitch's Twitter handle. And then badger-fi.com. You'll want to booknote the site. And if nothing else, you'll want to look at that well-dressed badger holding the Linksys access point.
Thanks again, Glenn. And we can follow you on Twitter at GRCate. I guess until next time.
Yeah, this is Glenn Cate, reminding all of you WLAN professionals out there to keep on blogging in the free world. Bye for now.
And now,
let's jump into our main session.
Well, I'm here today. We happen to be attending a CWAP class with Devin Aiken, and what I have with me is David Coleman. David, welcome.
Thank you, Keith.
Glad you could join us. For this podcast, we want to talk to you about your history of writing books for the wireless industry. So can you first tell us how you got started writing the first book?
Sure. So a long time ago, I had a friend at Cisco tell me the only way that you move up within the Cisco corporation was to write internal white papers. And if you wrote internal white papers at Cisco, you would get promoted and you'd move up in that organization. Now, I was self-employed. I was not working for Cisco, but I was looking to grow my business. And this was in the very, very early days of Wi-Fi, back in probably 802.11b days. And so I just decided to start writing white papers on my own and just releasing them. And so I wrote some really terrible white papers and just kind of put them out on the internet. There's all kinds of public repositories.
This was pre-blog days.
Yeah, way before blog. I don't think the word blog even existed yet. So put out a couple of really bad white papers. then my name got out a little bit. People actually downloaded the things. And then eventually, as I got approached by a couple of companies to write white papers for them as an independent writer, as not an employee, but as an independent resource. And I got approached both by Cognio to write a white paper on WIPs and security in terms of from a spectrum analyzer point of view.
Wasn't that back when they actually had a Cognio distributed spectrum analyzer? Yeah,
it was. And then I wrote that white paper, and that was the whole basis of the white paper was distributed spectrum analysis for security. Eventually, that white paper became Cisco branded because Cisco ended up buying Cognio, and it's now their clean air technology. And then I got approached by Fluke because I was actually doing some training for Fluke, and they actually asked me to write a couple of white papers.
That was the 802.11n?
Yes, I wrote an 802.11n white paper for them as well. All the white papers I do now are externally for the company I work for, Aerohive Networks. But after I figured out that I was kind of decent at writing, never had any real formal training in writing, I got approached by a publisher, Cybex, to write a competitive book for the CWNA exam. And there was already a book out on a different publisher. It was the official book. And I got approached, and I said, yeah, I'd love to give it a try, but I did not have the time to do it by myself. Being self-employed, it's a 90 hours a work week. So to make a long story short, I contacted a good friend and peer, David Westcott, and asked him if he'd be interested in co-writing with me, and he said yes, and that's ever since then. We've now been doing it for it seems like about 15 years. I think we've been co-writing books together.
So together, how many individual books, not versions, have you written?
3 individual books: the CWNA study guide, CWSP, and then the CWAP study guide as well. The core one, the one that we spend most of our time on, is the CWNA study guide, and we're getting ready to work on the 5th edition, the 5th time.
So 4 editions out already, 5th edition coming soon?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, we just signed the contract to write the 5th edition with Cybex, and the goal is to have it out later this year. There are very strict guidelines and when we're supposed to turn things in and stuff like that. It's hard to keep the timelines, but we're going to do our best.
And how many pages is it now? I mean, it is a hefty tome.
800, something like that. 800, but...
Too bad they don't pay you per kilo.
No, they don't pay us by the pound, unfortunately. But look, you're not going to make in the technical industry. You're not going to get rich writing. There's very few authors that actually make a lot of money off of writing tech books. However, writing does wonders for your career. The book has become it basically got mine and Westcott's name out there, and we've been very, very flattered as to the success of the book and how it's inspired a lot of people, and they use it as a kind of a gospel and as a reference guide, and not just as a study guide. I would say more people use it as a reference guide. I'm referring to the CWNA book. But, the truth be told, we make $1 a book. We make $1 a book, which if you do the math through the amount of time, you're talking burger flipping wages. But it pays off in the long run because of how much you learn, number one, just while you're writing the book. But it basically becomes a marketing venue for yourself.
I mean, it's the ultimate business card.
It really is. And I tell people this all the time. I try to tell them, just like somebody told me a long time ago, write white papers if you want to move up in this industry. I tell people, write. And it doesn't have to be a book. It can be a blog. All you have to do is look at Andrew Van Nagy and what he did with his blog and how he got his name out there. And you look at how many people come to your WLAN Pros convention and how many of them are blogging now. It's a great way to share the information, share the knowledge, but it's also a great way to get your name out there as well.
Well, and I think it's a great way to One of the things we noticed in Tech Field Day and in just talking off camera when the Tech Field Day guys are gone, and all those guys are bloggers, is an experience we've all had and shared, which is you have a question, so you go online, you Google, and the answer is in your own blog you wrote before. That the blogs themselves are your own memory, not just for others. So if you just want to remember your stuff yourself, I'm sure you've even looked up in your own book something you wrote it because it's in your book, but you had to go look it up.
There's no question. Look, there's no way in the world I have all 800 pages in my head. I have to go back to my own reference guide that Westcott and I wrote to look things up sometimes because I just don't remember. But yeah, absolutely. And it's the same thing with blogs. I've written a bunch of blogs for my company as well, and sometimes I'll do a search, and then up pops my blog. And a lot of times up pops one of your blogs or a lot of the other our peers in the industry. So, and it doesn't have to just, not everybody's going to be able to write a book, obviously, but anybody can write a blog, and it can be other things. It could be creating courseware. It could be PowerPoints. It could, and putting those in the public domain. It could be like what we're doing right now: podcast, videocast, Facebook Live, even Twitter. Even Twitter. I mean, but what is it? 128 characters? 140 characters. So I learn tons from Twitter. I don't spend as much time as I'd like on it, but I actually will peruse it a couple times a day, and I'll just or a couple times a week at least, and I'll see it, and I go, I didn't know that. And then there's somebody like yourself sharing some information, and then I go find and maybe research that information further. And I was actually telling somebody else in the room here that there's the Twitter community in the wireless LAN industry. It's kind of unique to the entire IT industry. So, yeah, I mean, it's we all share information. We all know each other. You don't see that in, like, say, the storage community or something like that, but you definitely see it in the Wi-Fi community. And it works well for us. Yes. Well, thank you very much for that feedback, especially on writing. I think everyone should write, and you've given great examples. We posted on the WLAN Pro's blog site a 10 talk you did earlier on how everyone needs to write. So thank you for that. Mm-hmm. To wrap this up, though, we're both sitting here in Atlanta at Devin Aiken's new CWAP class. It's enlightening. It is learning all sorts of new obscure things. Both of us have written CWAP books and materials for 15 years or more. Mm-hmm. And yet we're still here learning new things. Absolutely learning new things. And now I'm completely rethinking what I knew about aggregate MPDU. In the course of one day, I was like, I thought I knew this. And now I'm learning, my understanding is better. So you can never stop learning. I don't care what field you're in, but absolutely in Wi-Fi, because it's constantly changing, and even sometimes going back and taking a second look at what you thought you knew. Some of the things we've been either written in your book or taught or showed others, we weren't exactly right. Yeah, we might have taught some things wrong before. But it's good that it's improving, and we haven't even started to get in the complexity of AX. No, and I was kind of hoping that I would make it to retirement before AX, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. You might. Just hold on there. Yeah, so I'm actually pretty excited about AX, but I'm personally in the process of trying to learn it myself. I'm just trying to get a hold of everything I can and read everything I can about it, and preparing myself when the actual silicon comes out and we can touch it. So and realize that we have lots more to learn. So thanks for your time today, David. If you had, there's a question I like to ask people. If you could change one thing in Wi-Fi, what would it be? I'd make it full duplex. That's just, you just want to change the laws of physics. That's all. Yeah. That's all. I'm not asking much. Well, thanks for your time today. Okay. Thank you, Keith.
Bad 5 Minute with Eddie Forero. Bad Wi-Fi installations drive you crazy? You might just want to skip ahead a couple of minutes. You've been warned.
Welcome to another Bad 5 Minute with me, Eddie Forero from badfi.com. Today we'll be looking at bad antenna placement and installation. So one very common example of bad PHY that I see is incorrect antenna placement and installation. For example, I'm sure most of you are quite familiar with the misunderstanding of what omnidirectional means, right? It's not a perfect sphere going in all directions. It's more of a round circular donut shape, right? So how many times have you seen an AP in, say, a warehouse on a 40-foot ceiling with high gain dipoles attached to them, right? Omnis are best understood as that donut shape or maybe a balloon. So when you use a high gain dipole, what you're actually wind up doing is pushing that balloon in from the top and bottom and essentially creating a wider donut. So now your clients on the ground are actually getting less signal because this balloon donut has been squeezed flat, essentially coming up from the floor but expanding sideways across the ceiling. Another bad example of bad antenna PHY is not using the correct antenna. So Sam Clement sent me a picture a while back of an AP he saw where they used patch and dipoles on the same AP. Very bad PHY here. You can use dipoles or patches, but not both. Your coverage areas are going to vary wildly among your radios and clients. Understanding antenna patterns is essential to properly choosing, placing, and installing antennas. So for example, if you have, like, say, a high gain directional antenna on an AP hoping to cover, say, a wide area, you could wind up with hardly any coverage at all. The higher the gain, the more directional the coverage is. While it may be great for, say, like a point-to-point link, it's terrible for client coverage in, say, an outdoor eating area at high school. Antenna patterns can be difficult to understand to the uninitiated, so that's why it's important to take the time and understand how to read antenna patterns. In another example, this time from Gustavo Mastriani, and I really hope I said that right, he shows several pictures of APs at an airport that are mounted on walls. So what's so bad about that? Well, for one thing, these walls are all metal. Yeah. So right there you have those immediate RF reflections and distortions that come right back into the radio chain. So not a good thing. Next, the APs, these anyway, are designed to be installed horizontally on a ceiling, not vertically on a wall. Why? Because these particular APs have what are sometimes called a down tilt Omni antennas. This means that the antennas are designed to propagate mostly downward in a somewhat circular or omnidirectional pattern. If you think of the pattern as an umbrella shape, you can see that this design is optimized for being installed horizontally, with the RF energy being strongest under the AP in a circular shape. Placed high on a wall, as they are here, means that most of the RF energy is being sent across and over the heads of the majority of the clients. So lack of understanding of antenna patterns here led to bad PHY for this airport. So when looking to make antenna buying decisions or installing APs, make sure you take the time to understand the unique antenna patterns of what you are looking to deploy. This way you can ensure that you'll make the best placement and installation decisions that you can. To learn more about antennas, you can read the CWNA Guides section on antennas. As always, you'll find links in the show notes to see examples. Talk to you later.
WLAN Interview.
Well, hello. I'm here with Tim Rousset. Is I pronounce that right?
That's right. Good job. Yeah, nobody ever gets that right.
Oh, well, lucky I got it right the first time. We're here in D.C. Just had a great Ethiopian meal. Thank you for recommending it.
My pleasure.
I want to talk to you about WLAN AB, Wireless LAN Advisory Board. It's now changing its name to Wireless LAN Association. You've been involved on the executive committee for a while.
Yeah.
And so I thought we'd just spend a couple minutes and talk a little bit about it and how you got involved.
All right, perfect.
So, how did you get involved?
Right. Well, it was interesting. So I felt like I was a little late to the party. The executive board was already starting to form when I first became aware of the Wireless LAN Advisory Board. As you are well aware, Keith, the Wireless LAN Advisory Board had its initial beginnings in Wireless LAN Professional Conference in Dallas, I believe. And from there, Alan Blake had a nice talk and presenting his ideas for what this what became the Wireless LAN Advisory Board and is now becoming Wireless LAN Association, what that would look like. And so all that to say that I was sort of on the sidelines listening to it and seeing some of the conversations go by, but hadn't been plugged in enough to actually be aware that the Wireless LAN Advisory Board had been created until after most of the executive team was already coalesced. And anyway, so I got involved on the second meeting, I believe, and heard that there was an open slot on the executive team for the secretary position and threw my name in the hat.
So what does that mean? What kind of things are you involved in as a secretary?
It's probably not the most glamorous position from a purely technical wireless position, but
I don't think there are any glamorous volunteer positions.
It's a good perspective, but it's a lot of setting up the meetings and making sure that the meeting rooms are open, that kind of thing. So attending a lot of meetings. The huge advantage of that is that I'm on all the meetings, and so from that perspective, I'm able to express myself and be present in all of the meetings, and that's a huge benefit with it. But yeah, so mostly scheduling meetings, and then beyond that, myself and Rick put together the beacon that goes out every month.
So tell us about the beacon.
Yeah, the beacon.
I mean, by the way, I love your tagline on the the little masthead on the left side about what a beacon is. Well done.
Well, that's all Rick, so I appreciate it. But yeah, Rick. The whole thing is Rick's brainchild, so that's been great too. But I've been doing most of the content for it in terms of the large articles. And so the Beacon, it's our monthly newsletter that goes out and just describes some of the work that's going on, what's happening within the Wireless LAN Advisory Board. And then we've been doing a lot of interviews, and they've been really fun for me.
So how do you come up with some of those unique questions?
I always... most of the questions are pertinent to the work that's going on of the Wireless LAN Advisory Board, Wireless LAN Association, but I always try to slip in something that's a little bit more creative and just off the wall, a little fun question at the end, and just trying to... I go through your guys' backgrounds, what I know about you. With yours, I asked about how you got involved in ham radio and what your ham radio sign is. So things like that, just something that's a little bit more personal and something that you guys are interested in that maybe not fully known by the wireless community, but they would still find interesting. So
good. So Wireless LAN Advisory Board initially was to help come up with a set of guidelines on how to do good design.
Right.
At WLPC in Phoenix, the executive committee met, a whole bunch of volunteers met and talked. The end result was a transition of going to the Wireless LAN Association, and part of that would be the advisory board. So,
correct.
Tell us about how that turned out. What's the end goal here of having an association?
So, within the Wireless LAN Advisory Board, when that was running as a completely independent entity, I guess, there was... it was noticed that there were a lot of people who wanted to be a part of Wireless LAN Advisory Board but didn't necessarily want to help with the standards and wanted to more so just be a part of an association. And no one really outright said that, but it was more something that we had noticed as an executive board and honestly on some of the other committees as well. And so it was an idea that we weren't fully meeting the needs of the community. We were meeting some of the needs by creating standards for wireless installations and designs, but we weren't meeting all of the needs of the community. And so this really came out from Peter McKenzie, and he was independently trying to create a Wireless LAN Association, and we had a lot of overlapping people who would be involved on those two different communities, and just really talking things through, decided that it would be better to combine our efforts and kind of have the Wireless LAN Advisory Board then be a subset of the association, so that we can have a large group, a larger organization that would meet the needs of representing the individual wireless engineers and wireless community, to help get the voice of those users across, and then have a separate subset of that would then be creating the standards that we're looking to create. And so overall within the wireless community, there's a lot of entities that are able to have their voices heard, and these are normally larger groups. So you have the equipment manufacturers, Cisco, Aruba. I don't want to leave anyone out, but the manufacturers who are able to help create standards, push standards. They're getting their equipment certified by the Wi-Fi Alliance. So you have Wi-Fi Alliance out there pushing standards, getting their voice heard, and that's from more of an interoperability standpoint. And then you've got the IEEE, who's creating the protocols, the standards that are being pushed, but no one's really representing the wireless implementers, and that's really where the Wireless LAN Association comes in. It gives us a voice, because if we're all talking, and we're talking to the vendors, we're talking to Wi-Fi Alliance, we're talking to IEEE, but we're all representing ourselves, and so that has a lot less weight than an association which represents all of us and our overall viewpoints. And from that perspective, I think it's a really good move for the wireless community, because now these engineers do have a voice. So what would you say to someone who's thinking about joining? What do they do, and how can they get involved? Yeah, great. It's a great segue. So the best way to get involved, we have a website that's going to be launched at the beginning of next month, and on the website there will be a lot of information about how to join. And so that would be the first place I would have people look. You can also reach out to any of the executive board members. That's myself, Alan Blake, Rick Murphy, Nigel, Bowden, I believe it's pronounced, Keith, obviously. I think I mentioned you once already. Hopefully you can edit some of this. And then Peter and Sam Clements. And Ronald Van Clunen. There you go. Yep, that's the 8 members of the executive team. And so I can agree that any one of them would be more than willing to talk to you and get you and help get you involved. It is a community effort. The more people we can get involved, the bigger and stronger the community will be. Yeah, absolutely. Well, final question for you. Yeah. What do you do in your spare time? Kind of ask what people's hobbies are, but sometimes people answer the hobby question with a hobby. What you got? If you had an extra 4 hours this weekend, what would you do? 4 hours this weekend. So there was a point in my life when everything I was doing was technical. I was studying for different exams, different certifications. At this point in my life, I'm trying to get myself in a little bit better shape. I put on a little bit weight doing all that study, and so these days I'm finding myself doing a little bit more rock climbing, mountain biking. I love winter sports. I think that they're a lot of fun, but yeah, that would be my... So you live in the wrong city for winter sports. I kind of do. I grew up in Colorado, but moved to Washington, D.C. 10 years ago, and still can't get the snow out of my system. I love the snow, love the mountains. Well, great. Thanks for your time. Hopefully we'll see more in the Beacon. Appreciate all your effort in helping the community with being part of the Wireless LAN Association. Thank you. Thanks.
Wireless LAN terminology. Do you know what this word means?
Decibel. A decibel is a numerical unit designed to avoid the direct use of exponential numbers. 0 decibels is 10 to the power of 0/10, or 1. 3 decibels is 10 to the power of 3/10, or about 2. 10 decibels is 10 to the power of 10/10, or 10. Decibel is a convenient unit for expressing exponential power gain and loss of an RF signal.
This has been episode 104 of Wireless LAN Professionals podcast. Thanks for listening all through the end. We had some great content today. A little bit about Badger-Fi, some information on how to support 1 million users, some Bad-Fi information, a little session with David Coleman on how to write, as well as an interview on the Wireless LAN Association. So thanks for your time, and we'll see you in next week's new episode that's coming out just a week. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Wireless LAN Pros for all the latest news and updates, and also connect directly with Keith on Twitter at Keith R. Parsons. Head over to www.wlanpros.com for this episode's show notes, as well as the latest in all things Wi-Fi.